The June 27, 2019 meeting of the Woodbridge Township Board of Education will please come to order. Mr. Secretary, will you note that Mr. Harris is running late? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Della Pietro?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Sedana?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
And Mr. Treebwasser.
Here. Mr. Secretary, as required by the Sunshine Law, please read the notice of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies in which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. January 4th, 2019, emailed to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office, posted in Avenel Middle School and the Board of Education Administration Building.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Della Pietro, please read the closed session statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. In compliance with the Sunshine Law, the Board must go into closed session in order to discuss subjects exempted from the public portion of our meeting. The discussions to be held in closed session will be regarding personnel matters. Additionally, the Board will discuss a WTSAA grievance. There will also be board discussion regarding the superintendent evaluation assessment. Lastly, the board will discuss the attorney-client conversation regarding the trademark matter. Any information regarding the closed session discussion will be released to the public when the reasons for discussing these matters in closed session no longer exist.
I have a motion by Mr. Della Pietro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Molnar. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Board will retire to closed session. We'll return as soon as we are done with the matters at hand. Thank you. Please rise for a salute to the flag and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have a motion to reconvene?
So motion.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Della Pietro?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Sedana? Here. Mr. Tamburello? Here. Mr. Velez?
Here.
Mr. Treebwasser.
Here. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record any notice of bids received by the board.
Mr. President, there were no bids to report this time.
Dr. Zaga, superintendent's agenda, please.
Mr. President, I have 20 items to present to the board.
Do I have a motion on the superintendent's agenda?
So motion.
I have a motion by Mr. Sedana. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Mr. Tamburello. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana? Yes. Mr. Tamburello? Yes. Mr. Velez? Yes. Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Policy and planning agenda, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Treebwasser. The Policy and Planning Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, recommends the following 6 items. I move the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Tamburello. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello? Yes. Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Curriculum, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Treebwasser. The Curriculum Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, recommend this following 7 items. I move the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Sedana. Any comments or questions from the board?
Mr. President?
Yes, sir, Mr.
I
Harris.
just want to highlight number 3. It was pointed out in the Curriculum Committee. I just want to highlight for the public, item number 3, the district is once again offering a free PSAT and SAT course, excuse me, not a course, but the actual test, scheduled typically for October, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Bader. What's nice about this, it's a free SAT test. Given during the school day, our students, in my opinion, are more fresh than they would be on a Saturday morning. It's free of charge, and our records have indicated over the past 2 years that participation is very, very strong. And in my humble opinion, it gives them a leg up on students in other districts, most of whom do not provide this free test. So thank you to Mr. Bader, Dr. Zagan, and the rest of the administration and board for once again continuing this program.
Are there any questions or comments from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana? Yes. Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez? Yes. Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Finance and Insurance, Mr. Tamburello.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Insurance Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following 20 items. This evening, I move for the adoption of the foregoing 20 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Tamburello. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Athletics and extracurricular agenda. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Athletics and Extracurricular Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, presents the following 19 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana? Yes. Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
And Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Buildings and Grounds agenda, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Buildings and Grounds Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following. Tonight, I'll be moving items 1 and number 2.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Comments or questions from the board? Comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana? Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes. Personnel agenda, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you again, Mr. President. The Personnel Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, presents the following. Tonight, I will be moving 30 items.
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delapietro. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
I will be abstaining on item number 4 in the name of Edward Bronsdorf, voting yes on the remaining agenda.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana? Yes. Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
I will be voting no on the name Ed Bronsdorf on item 4. I will be abstaining on the name Michael Henderson in item 30, yes on all other items. Mr. Bush, do you have any recommendations this evening?
None at this time, Mr. President.
Is there any old business that should be brought before the attention of the board? Any new business to be brought before the attention of the board?
Mr. Treebwasser?
Mr.
I'd
Harris.
like to highlight just 2 things, both agenda items here. On the policy and planning agenda, I apologize, you moved too quickly. Last item, item number 6, we are approving the county to install a traffic signal on our property, the intersection of Inman Avenue and Delaware Avenue. That's in Colonia. That light, in my opinion, as a lifelong Colonia resident, I think as any Colonia resident can attest, will provide a heightened and increased level of security and safety to motorists as well as pedestrians intersecting at that intersection, which is probably best known as the Evergreen intersection, which leads down to one of our schools, Colonia Middle School. So installing a traffic light there will be tremendous. That is a project that's fully funded and supported by Middlesex County. So thank you to Middlesex County for recognizing that a traffic light was indeed necessary, and to the township and to the school board for supporting that project. Lastly, I wanted to highlight, it's sort of an item on the personnel agenda. We are officially hiring our second of 2 new engineering faculty members. It was a goal of ours as a district dating back to at least September to ensure that we have at least one engineering teacher at each of our 3 high schools. We talk about STEM and STEAM all the time. Our district for some time has been lacking that E at all 3 of our high schools. Only Colonial High School for the past 3-4 years has had an engineering teacher. This district made it a priority to add an engineering teacher at Woodbridge High School as well as John F. Kennedy Memorial High School. Tonight we accomplished that, and I want to give credit to Dr. Zega, Dr. Massimino for making that a reality. Thank you very much.
Is there any other new business?
To the Board President.
Yes, sir, Mr. Tamburello.
Also piggybacking on Mr. Harris's comments from earlier about the free SATs, also this evening we are hiring our AP advisors as well, our advanced placement. We're certainly heading in the right direction with our AP courses. And likewise, this evening we are hiring our SAT boot camp personnel. I have never been to an AP review class, but they're certainly effective. And anybody listening this evening, really encourage your kids at the high school level to take these AP classes. It will impact your college tuition with passing grades on the AP, and we're hiring a bunch of folks to be our advisors in that area. And quite frankly, again, I've never been to one of the AP review classes. I don't think I can keep up with that subject matter, quite frankly. But I have been to the SAT boot camp, and those folks do an outstanding job. I believe it's a couple Saturdays in the fall, and I've been to those, and they are equally effective. And I'm glad we're putting our money where our mouth is as far as encouraging our students to advance their educational careers once they leave this district. So I like the hires this evening on those 2 fronts as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tamburello. Is there any other new business from the board? In keeping with my past practice, I'm going to give a brief update. So on School 18, things are progressing. There was a question last week, last board meeting, by a member of the public regarding the way our tests are done for CO2. They were done, Mr. Deffelson, they were done, not all while students were in there. Dr. Zega has a request from the principal that from now on they're done only when the students are in the classroom. And Mr. Wolferman will speak with the company to make sure that they adhere to that as best of their ability. Regarding 18, they're still moving forward on the other projects. Waterproofing, we seem to have had a much better year this year. I don't attribute it to any one thing, but I think everything we've done overall has really made a significant improvement. Once the ceiling tiles are done, School 18 should be a much happier, safer, and more comfortable environment from an emotional perspective for everybody. Woodbridge Middle School is moving along. School 11, they will do the asbestos abatement in the old school, which will take anywhere between 3 and 4 weeks, and then they will take another 3 to 4 weeks to bring the building down and have the other building complete for the beginning of school. Tonight on the Buildings and Grounds agenda, we approved the repointing of School 28, and other than that, we haven't really had any other issues in any of our schools. So at that point, I will keep in our past practice. We will open this portion of the meeting up for statements from the public. If you wish to say something, please come to the microphone, provide your name, part of the township you reside in for the record, and please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D. You will also notice that Ms. Rooney has a time clock so that the people at the podium can see how the time is progressing to hopefully make it a little more comfortable for them and don't feel cut off. Yes.
Brian Dellison, Island. Thank you for responding, Mr. Treewasser, on the indoor air quality testing at School 18. But this was an issue back in September, and Dr. Zega assured us that the testing would be done during the school day when the students are present, because that was the recommendation, that that's when the testing should be done. So out of a 180-day school year, of the 10 test sets of data that were provided to the public, 5 of them were done during the school day. The other 5 were done after hours. So why is nobody following up and staying on top of things? So here it is another year later, 50% of the time, Smoyer did what he was supposed to be doing at the time he was supposed to be doing, and the other 50% of the time it was done after hours when it provided no usable data. I think if our students performed at a 50% level, they would be considered failing. Yet we just keep going along with Smoyer and Ahira when, back in September, statements were made that the reason we had the mold problems in the schools in September was because of bad advice received from him. So I don't understand why it continues to be acceptable to all the board members that the protocol is not being followed as outlined and promised to the public back in September.
I could give you some reasons why that happened. I'm not going to waste your time. We recognize that it was a deficiency, and it's going to be corrected.
It's not a waste of my time. Give me the reasons.
Part of the problem is we had two separate principals in there, and one of the principals didn't understand what the protocol was and decided that it was interfering with the class, and that had some impact. So, I mean, that's on us to take full responsibility for it.
Okay, but that spanned the times they were done after hours spanned the course of both principals that were there.
Understand, and I believe that the reason for having that being done then is so it didn't interfere with the class. I don't think they really understood the gravity. We probably did not make it clear enough the importance of having it done during the classroom. That will not happen again.
So it was okay to disturb class sometime for those principals, but then not other times.
I can't speak for them. All I can tell you is that it won't happen again. They will be given clear instructions that they're to be done during the day.
Okay, well, we were told that that would happen back in September again, and here we are a year later, and it's the same thing. So
I share your frustration. I wish that I could
I don't think
be
you do,
everywhere at once.
because it was my daughter that was out of school for 6 weeks because of the conditions there, not yours. So it impacted me directly.
I understand that.
Well, you keep saying that, but things are not changing and being done the way they're supposed to be done. And nobody is speaking up and holding Smoyer or Ahira or whoever's in charge of the testing accountable. I don't believe it's the building principal's responsibility to schedule the testing to keep the building safe. I believe it's the board's responsibility to stay on top of that.
Agreed.
Good evening, Tom Maris, Fords, New Jersey. Just a couple of quick comments. I'm glad you've got the time right there. It does help anybody that's up here. And I'd like to take just a moment to say, look, there are many things that the school board does and the administration that are worthy of praise. Unfortunately, I don't normally get a chance to come up here and do that because I've got a 5-minute limitation. So if I spend it all saying basically what you've already said to the public, and I'm not saying you're self-aggrandizing, that you're telling everybody what is good about the schools and what is positive that's happening, I don't have the time, neither does somebody else to come up here and restate that. So we're here to ask questions, and I brought that up at the last meeting, and I can go back and tell you that I did review those tapes, as I said I would, from the 26th, and it was quite clear that it was said to me that you don't answer questions. We can come up and make comments, but you don't have to answer. In that said, I would appreciate if the attorney, who I have a tremendous respect for from a legal perspective, doesn't answer questions that I'm posing to the board, to the elected officials, unless you specifically ask them to. I don't need to be corrected or admonished by the hired helps, so to speak. So I'd appreciate that doesn't happen.
Mr. Maris, it's my job to be up here and defend the board. If I believe that there's a question that needs to be answered by me, I'm going to answer it every single time.
Okay, it wasn't a question. It was a statement. And again, you jumped in and said, oh, you do answer my questions. Yes, when the time allows, and I'm allowed to do that, you have answered. In the open session where we are now, which is kind of a misnomer because it's only open as far as us coming up here and saying something to you, as you've clearly pointed out, you don't have to answer us. But if not, then when? Submit Oprahs, I do that. And unfortunately, I don't like doing it because it is time-consuming, it is very expensive, and I certainly appreciate Ms. Rooney and the other staff that have to go through literally sometimes thousands of pages to send them to me. It's very time-consuming and very costly. And simply a lot of that could be avoided if you answer the questions when we come up here. Don't dodge, just answer them. We'll come back to you. Or we'll gladly ask for a meeting and do it on the side. If it needs to go public, we can take it there. I've got about 3 minutes left. Let me get into the rest of it. I just want to make a notation, too, that on July 29th will be the final filing date. Anybody that's interested in running for the school board should go down and see the board secretary and get a petition if you want to run as a candidate for the school board. The filing date has to be in New Brunswick, and it has to be submitted by July 29th. And again, because we live in a democracy, I hope people will avail themselves of being able to go out and run for office. People here do a great job, many of them. But there's always room for somebody else to come in with fresh ideas, and I encourage an open election and would ask anybody that's interested to do so. Again, because I'm not allowed to ask questions, which seems to be kind of arbitrary because, as I pointed out last time, you did entertain questions from the public and you answered them, and yet you still profess that this is a time that we can only make statements. So I'd like a clarification. Can we ask a question and get an answer, or are you going to doggedly and then steadfastly, don't vacillate, either you do it for everybody or do it for none, but don't answer questions for some and not for others. That is unfair.
Mr. Maris, I do answer questions, but when I've already stated what an answer to a question is, and you keep asking the same question, expecting a different answer with the same information, that's not going to happen, and I'm not going to waste my time or the public's time answering the same question. At the time I made that statement was directly related to School 11 and Woodbridge Middle School, and I had stated those in my statement about the environmental situation in the district. You asked me the exact same question which I had just answered. I answer your questions frequently.
Not that
but when
night.
you, excuse me,
It's my time. You're burning up my time. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Have your time then.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the other part of the problem. We got 5 minutes, and if you jump in there, you can burn it all up on us.
That's not accurate. You have 5 minutes, and to the extent that, for example, when I interrupted before, you can have those 7 seconds back that it took me to make my sentence clear. Okay, so if you want, and Mr. Maris, if you want 5 minutes and 7 seconds as a result of what I said, add another 25 or so. Just be respectful of the time. It's not just the board. Okay, it's the public. I mean, at some point, people are at a meeting and they want to have an opportunity to speak as well.
Okay, I understand that. But now I'm glad you clarified that, because it has been the other way. I've been told your 5 minutes is up, sit down. And it doesn't happen just here, it happens at town council meetings as well. So I'm glad you clarified that. And again, I'll go back, and it wasn't a repeat of the question. If I'm repeating a question, I have no problem. Somebody come back and say, you just asked that, I answered it. You came back with a kind of a smart aleck ass when I answer to a question that I asked about scheduling on the Raw Street. You didn't have a crystal ball. Gee, I thought every wizard carried one. But I've now submitted the Oprah request, and I do know that you get updates from your contractors as to progress reports. I don't see why those can't be made public. I'm not asking for your security details. In fact, I did get a nice response from Mr. Wolferman, which I will be responding to. My lawyer is looking at it now. We'll see how we want to proceed on that. But again, this is our time to be able to come and address you openly and hopefully on a friendly basis. It doesn't have to be adversarial. I don't want it to be. But if it need be, it will be. Thank you.
John Bertonic, Woodbridge over here. Dr. Zaga, a couple of years ago, when we first had what you call chief of security, the first employee, and my question was to you that time, chief of security was only one employee. And then I asked, who is supposed to be protected, administration, school board, or the schools? And you did say it was the schools. And I said, how could the one person can protect 24 schools, which I believe that's how many we have. And of course, we all know of it, that he was always in your administration building, school board administration building. And we all know now there's not just a one person. We got quite a few of them. I know you don't have to say how many of them, but again, why is that so important to have all those people to be at the school board? I mean, at the administration building, the school board on School Street there. Why is this so important instead of schools? Are you people in kind of a danger or whatever it is? I mean, this is kind of why there was create additional one position. Now you got 5, 6 positions. I don't know what the payroll is. You don't have to tell me how many people. I understand it could be up as much as half a dozen people. And when you go there, they are a new school board there. They change the shifts and this and that. Now that we got a new schools, of course, we need more protection. But why is it so important that you people get protection instead of kids? Again, talk about roster school, School 11. I think it was a great idea. We need a new school. Did anybody was on the decision when there was made decision how to build a school, design the school, what do you call it, does anybody of you decided or just done like a city hall, they found a plane someplace in different state or someplace built a school like that? People asking me about it. I'm in business for 55 years. And we always, when you get something, when you go planning board, zoning board, you go to something that's going to coexist with a neighborhood, to build the same neighborhood. And people want to know what are they building with the old school 11 is. They think it's a warehouse. It does not appeal to our to environment. It doesn't appeal to neighborhood. It's a completely different structure that goes with the neighborhood. Just look. And I didn't think about it. I looked at it. And even the colors of the buildings. When you look at the building next to the left and right, that's how the Amboy Avenue looks like. You go from up and down the street, that's what they do. But that building is just on itself, it's like a poor Reading warehouses. So I'm sorry, but it wasn't, whoever designed it, I don't blame, probably cheaper to build it. It's cheaper to whatever it was. It's a common thing to do it. But I don't think it just doesn't go with the area. Another thing would be solar panels. Are you putting those new solar panels in the new school?
Mr. Vitale, I'm going to wait till you're done with your 5 minutes, and then I'll answer your questions.
Okay. That would be a question. Again, can I go back to the Dr. Zager's proposal on the 13th of November 13th? About the $287,000 as some kind of mental thing.
Yes, yes.
They suggested for School 11, Roasted School. One second.
ESS is the name of the company.
It's the Board of approval an agreement to implement effective school solution to provide therapeutic mental health services, professional and development of the workers, Rose Street School, 2019 to 20, $285,000. Now, we do know there's a problem, so maybe a big community. Is that just a roasted school, or there's going to be 2 other schools too? Or you bring the people with the disadvantages to come out to the roasted school?
I said I'll answer all your questions when you're done with your
Well,
5
you're
minutes.
spending $285,000 for mental studying or something for the kids. They will go to School 11.
Okay, so we'll start at the beginning. You asked about the security. The security staff, there's one person at the front door of the building to make sure that people don't come in there that don't belong. Mm-hmm. There are other people that are in the building, as that's their base of operation. That's where they perform their paperwork when they do things like truancy or people that are going to our schools that don't belong. They need an office to work in, and that's where their office is. The director of security works out of that building as well, but probably spends only 20 or 25% of his day physically in the office. The next question was about the Ross Street School. No, it was something about, you said Dr. Zega. No, that was right. Next one is Ross Street School, that you feel it looks like a warehouse. And, the outside of the building may not be as pleasingly aesthetic as we would like it to be, but the pleasing aesthetic parts and the interaction parts are inside the building, where it's mostly going to affect the students. And quite honestly, from my perspective and my perspective only, that if we're going to put money into a building, it needs to be inside where the kids are, not on the outside where people are driving by. The ESS, which is $285,000, is a mental health group that is going to we're going to try it for a year and see how it works out. And they're going to deal with students that are at risk, that may not have IEPs, but do have some emotional or mental health issues that would not normally get addressed through the special education services. And we're going to see if this helps us to keep those kids in school, keep them active, keep them safe. And just if we save 15 kids from going to out-of-district mental health driven schools, we have paid for that 10 times over.
But again, we talk about the kids just, they're going to go to...
Oh, that was the other part. You said, is it only at Ross Street? No. This group is going to deal with students throughout the district.
Okay, but
And
it's go-
parents, and it's going
it's
to be
gonna be
about
done at Ross Street.
counseling.
Good.
And if it really works out well, and we find out that it is a solid program, then we may look to replicate that in-house, or we may look to expand it, depending on which is most cost-effective.
Very good, that is a great idea. But again, the facade of the outside of the building, I don't think it would be too much expense to do it. But again, it just does not blend with the rest of the
Well,
rest
Mr.
of the
Vitalik, let's
community.
wait and see what it looks like when it's completed.
What else can you do? Put Woodbridge School 11 on it? Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
I think the thing is, it's a modern building. We're moving forward. You know, the Empire State Building was built in 1920-something. The Freedom Tower was built a couple of years ago. It's a totally different look. It's going to be a 21st century learning institution. It's not going to be the little 1910 brick schoolhouse. So it's going to have a modern look. And, you know, it's like the president said, it's what's on the inside. Classrooms that aren't gigantic where, you know, 50 kids used to be in a classroom. We don't have that no more. We're going to have state-of-the-art science labs, music rooms. So the school was built in a totally different era. So, yeah, it looks modern because it's a modern building.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
did somebody else want to speak that I missed?
Yeah, just to back
Go
up, Ms. John, I don't know how close you got to that building or if you had the opportunity to go in it, like board has. We were involved every step of the way at the beginning of this process and laying it out. Mr. Molnar and I were there 24 hours ago, as a matter of fact. We walked through, Ms. Bourdain was in there, we've all been in there. This school, we are going to be so proud of this school, inside and out. I just asked for you to speak to some of your neighbors in late September when we have our back-to-school nights, because we've even planned up to the back-to-school night that we can't wait for people to get in that building and just see the excitement on the learning environment. No need to rebut, but I just asked in September, I asked you, reach out to your neighbors who go to that school and ask them what an amazing facility, inside and out. Now, I'll venture to say I don't mind the inside or outside look of the building. It is a jewel of a building and tremendous learning environment. We're going to be proud of that school, very proud of it. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Timbrell. Anybody else?
And Mr. President, just one thing I'll add. In trying to keep the building with a lot of its past, we did try to use some of the terracotta, the ornamental on the door frames and on the facade of the building. But as the contractors are trying to save a lot of it, it's just crumbling because it's
100 years
it's
old.
100 years old. It's over 100 years old. So we do want to have that little bit of the old with the modern, combine the two. And right now we're having an issue with trying to, to get it off the old building because it is crumbling. But, the original plans do have some of the old being mixed in with the new.
Mr. Tribus?
Yes, sir, Mr.
I
Harris.
also wanted to just throw some color on as well. I was president when the blueprints were presented to myself from the administration, and in tandem, we approved of those building designs. The school was designed by LAN or LAN. That's all they do is design and build schools. They're award-winning in their designs. James Monroe Elementary School in Edison was built and designed by that architectural and engineering firm. It is a little lighter colored than I think I had imagined, but I missed the tour yesterday, unfortunately, and I very much look forward to going inside of it. So I certainly support what my fellow members have said about the building as well. So that's just some color commentary to how the design came to be. It came from award-winning architects and engineers. And just to answer Mr. Vitarek's question, or a response to the level of security at the administration building, certainly as Mr. Treebwasser pointed out, some of the security staff, lay people, are based out of the administration building, and then they spend most of their day outside of the building. I would be remiss if I did not remind the public that every day we have police officers, paid police officers, who visit the schools throughout the day, check all the doors, walk the hallways, patrol the parking lot. So the administration building is less protected than our 26 other schools. So I just want to highlight that. I see Dr. Massimino in charge of security shaking his head here. And so I just wanted to highlight that again, that student security above adult security is still our number one priority.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Yes, sir.
Raul Castillo, Perth Amboy. I would like to read some prepared remarks that I have here today. So good evening. Once again, my name is Raul Castillo, and I am the project coordinator for a group called the Middlesex County Council for Young Children. The mission of the Middlesex CCYC is to improve early childhood services from pregnancy through age 8 in Middlesex County by bringing together families and community partners through collaboration and community building. Our council in Woodbridge Township meets monthly at the Greenway Family Success Center in Fords. This council consists of parents, community stakeholders, and agency service providers. We discuss different concerns that the residents of Woodbridge currently have, and we educate ourselves on how to best influence change. For the last several months, our council has discussed the issue of preschool affordability and how the Woodbridge School District applying for the New Jersey Preschool Expansion Grant could drastically change the lives of some residents. Imagine parents saving hundreds of dollars a month on the rising costs of childcare. Imagine the 3- and 4-year-old children in this community having access to high-quality preschool, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Imagine our children going to kindergarten prepared for success. Most importantly, imagine the return we will see long-term by investing in our future leaders. I would personally like to thank Dr. Massimino for attending our most recent meeting on June 10th. We are truly grateful for your time, and we enjoyed the very productive conversation we shared regarding the children and families of this township. We are open to having any other community members or school representatives at our upcoming meeting on July 8th. Tonight, a few parents and partners are here with me, and some may be also sharing their personal testimonies and their feelings on why Woodbridge Township should consider applying for the New Jersey Preschool Expansion Grant. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Just so you're aware of it, this is a conversation we've been having for probably a month or so. We're recognizing it. We have some logistical issues that are restricting the amount of students we'd be able to provide it for, but it's certainly high on our radar. We're trying to come up with a fair and equitable way to be able to provide it.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Massimino is part of the group for a reason, and certainly we want to work with you to see what we can accomplish to service the most number of students possible.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Dr. Massimino.
just want to thank Mr. Castillo and all the parents. I was fortunate enough to join them at the Greenway Success Center, just so everybody's on the same page. We did discuss some of the logistical issues, from the timing of the grant to how much time it would take to actually plan this with curriculum, transportation, safety. There's a large number of items, but the parents were very open and receptive. It was a very productive discussion, so I'm currently working with Mr. Castillo to get some information from the private establishments regarding square footage, so that we can make an honest assessment. Obviously, no decision here is made unilaterally, so I just want to thank Mr. Castillo and all of the people that joined us, so that we can continue to look at this and make an educated decision. So thank you.
Thank you. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So motion?
I have a motion by Mr. Molnar. Second by Mr. Tamburello. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.